imagine. Hello, you're on the channel 33 Facts. Here we share amazing stories, scientific misconceptions, and unexplained facts. Get comfortable, let's begin. First myth, bulls hate the color red. You've seen it 1,000 times. The matador in his suit, the red cape, the bull charging with fury, eyes locked on that bright red cloth. It looks like pure rage at the color itself. But here's the truth. Bulls don't see red at all. They're actually colorblind to red and green, just like many people with red-green color blindness. The bull isn't charging because of the color, it's charging because of the movement. The cape is waved, it flutters, it creates a threat in the animal's mind. The red is just tradition, a dramatic choice for the audience. If the matador waved a blue or yellow cape the same way, the bull would still charge. And that's not all. In many countries, bullfights now use less stressful methods, and scientists keep reminding us the real danger is motion, not hue. But wait, there's a nuance. This misconception is so strong that even in cartoons and movies, red is treated as a universal anger trigger for animals. Think of cartoons where a character waves a red flag and suddenly a bull, a rhino, or even a moose goes wild. That image is burned into our culture. But in reality, most mammals don't see colors the way we do. Dogs, for example, see the world in blues and yellows, not reds and greens. So when your dog ignores that bright red toy, it might not be stubborn. It might just look grayish to him. And here's what's surprising. Even humans can be fooled by color myths. We assume animals react to color because we do, but their senses are often tuned to completely different signals. Smell, sound, movement, heat. Now for the most curious part. This idea that red angers bulls actually helped spread another myth, that bright colors in general provoke animals. People avoid wearing bright clothes in certain areas, thinking it will attract aggressive wildlife. But in most cases, it's not the color that matters. It's how you move, how you smell, and whether you're acting like a threat. A deer might bolt from a sudden movement in a green jacket, but ignore a bright yellow hiker walking slowly. And here's what raises questions. If we've known for decades that bulls don't hate red, why does the myth still survive so strongly? Probably because it's simple, visual, and fits a dramatic story. And that's often how misconceptions live. Not because they're true, but because they're easy to remember. And here's another example. Second myth. Ostriches bury their heads in the sand when scared. You've heard it in jokes, seen it in cartoons, maybe even used it yourself to describe someone avoiding reality. But ostriches don't actually do this. What they really do is much more practical and a lot less silly. When an ostrich feels threatened, it often lies low, stretches its long neck along the ground, and flattens its head. From a distance, this can look like it's burying its head in the sand, but it's really just trying to blend in, to become less visible to predators. Their feathers match the dry earth, and their low profile makes them harder to spot. Here is an important detail. Ostriches also do this when they're taking care of their eggs. They dig a shallow nest in the sand and then turn and settle over the eggs, using their beaks to carefully move sand and position the eggs. To a casual observer, this can look like the bird is sticking its head into the ground. But it's actually parenting behavior, not panic. And that's not all. Ostriches are far from helpless. They can run at speeds over 30 miles per hour and deliver powerful kicks that can seriously injure a lion. So the idea of them hiding their heads in fear is not just wrong, it's a serious underestimation of a very capable bird. And here's what's really interesting. This myth has been around for centuries, going back at least to ancient Roman times. Writers like Pliny the Elder wrote about it as if it were fact, and that description stuck. Over time, it became a metaphor for denial used in psychology, politics, and everyday speech. But modern wildlife researchers, using cameras and long-term observation, have never seen an ostrich bury its head in the sand out of fear. They see them lying low, they see them tending nests, but never literally burying their heads. And here's a twist. The myth is so powerful that some people still argue about it, even when shown clear footage. That's how strong a simple image can be. It can override evidence again and again. Let's move on. Third myth, goldfish have a memory of only 3 seconds. This one is everywhere, in jokes, in school projects, in casual conversation. People say, oh, it's like a goldfish. It forgets everything in seconds. But that's not true at all. Goldfish can remember things for months, even years. Scientists have trained goldfish to do all kinds of tasks: press levers for food, navigate mazes, recognize shapes and colors, and even distinguish between different pieces of music. They can remember the layout of their tank, the location of food, and the routine of feeding time. Their memory is not 3 seconds. It's actually quite good for a small fish. Now pay attention. In one famous experiment, researchers trained goldfish to push a lever to get food at a certain time of day. After several weeks, the fish learned to show up at the right time and press the lever. When the experiment continued for months, the fish still remembered. In another test, goldfish were taught to swim through a maze to reach a reward. They learned the correct path and remembered it over long breaks. And here's what's surprising: goldfish can also recognize individual humans. If you're the one who feeds them every day, they'll often swim to the surface when you approach, even if you're not holding food. That's not a 3-second memory. That's recognition and expectation. And then another detail emerges. This myth probably started because goldfish are often kept in small, boring tanks with little stimulation. In that environment, they don't have much to remember or do, so they seem dull and forgetful. But in a richer environment, with plants, hiding spots, and interaction, they show much more complex behavior. And here's what raises questions. Why do we accept such a low view of animal intelligence so easily? Maybe because it's comforting. If a goldfish forgets everything in seconds, it's not suffering in a tiny bowl. But the truth is, they're more aware than we think, and that changes how we should treat them. The next point is no less amazing. Fourth myth: sharks are mindless killing machines that attack humans on sight. Hollywood has built an entire genre around this idea. The shark as a silent, unstoppable predator, always hungry, always hunting people. But in reality, sharks are not obsessed with humans at all. Most shark species are shy, cautious, and avoid large animals like us. The vast majority of shark attacks on humans are cases of mistaken identity. The shark sees a silhouette that looks like a seal or a sea lion, takes a bite, and then quickly lets go when it realizes it's not its usual prey. And here's an important detail: humans are not on the shark's menu. We're bony, not fatty, and we don't taste good to them. Now for the most curious part. Out of more than 500 known shark species, only a handful are responsible for the majority of attacks on people. Great whites, tiger sharks, and bull sharks are the main ones, and even among them, attacks are extremely rare. Statistically, you're far more likely to be injured by a vending machine, a falling coconut, or a lightning strike than by a shark. And here's what's surprising: sharks are actually more afraid of us than we are of them. Boats, noise, pollution, and fishing nets are a much bigger threat to sharks than humans are to them. Millions of sharks are killed every year by people, while shark attacks on humans number in the dozens globally. And here's what is usually not mentioned: many shark attacks are not attacks in the aggressive sense. They're investigative bites. The shark is curious, using its mouth to explore, just like a dog might sniff or nudge something. Because sharks don't have hands, they use their mouths to touch and taste. That's why many bites are single, non-fatal, and the shark leaves immediately. And here's a twist: in places where shark tourism is done responsibly, divers regularly swim with large sharks without incident. The sharks are calm, predictable, and clearly not out for blood. But the myth of the man-eater shark is so strong that it's hard to change public perception, even with clear evidence. Let's dig deeper. Fifth myth: bats are blind. You've probably heard the phrase "blind as a bat" used to describe someone with terrible eyesight. But bats are not blind at all. In fact, most bats have perfectly good vision. Many species rely on their eyes to navigate, especially in daylight or in well-lit areas. Fruit bats, for example, depend heavily on sight to find flowers and fruit. They can see colors and shapes quite well. And here's an important detail: echolocation is not a replacement for vision. It's an extra sense used in the dark or in complex environments. Bats use both hearing and sight together, like we use eyes and ears. Now pay attention. Echolocation works by sending out high-pitched sounds and listening for the echoes that bounce back. This lets bats see with sound, detecting obstacles, prey, and even the texture of surfaces, but they don't turn off their eyes. In experiments, bats have been shown to avoid obstacles they can see, even when echolocation would also work. And here's what's surprising: some bats can see ultraviolet light, which humans can't. This helps them spot flowers and fruit that reflect UV, making them stand out in the dark. So not only are bats not blind, in some ways their vision is better than ours. And then another detail emerges. The myth that bats are blind probably comes from the fact that they are active at night and rely so much on sound. People assume that if an animal uses echolocation, it must not need eyes. But that's like saying a person with a flashlight doesn't need eyes. And here's what raises questions. Why do we so often assume that animals with unusual senses must be lacking in others? It's a kind of bias. We think in human terms, and when an animal doesn't behave like us, we assume it's broken or limited. But in reality, many animals have senses we can't even imagine, and they use them in ways that are perfectly adapted to their world. If you enjoy our videos about amazing facts, myths, and bold debunking of lies, support us with a like and write the number 1 in the comments. If not, write 0. This way we'll understand what interests you and make our episodes even better. 6th myth: chameleons change color to blend into their surroundings. This is the classic image: a chameleon on a leaf, instantly turning green, or on a brown branch, turning brown. But that's not the main reason they change color. Chameleons change color mostly to communicate and to regulate their body temperature. When they're stressed, excited, or trying to impress a mate, their colors shift dramatically. A male might turn bright to show dominance or dark to show submission. And here's an important detail: their color change is controlled by tiny crystals in their skin, not by matching the background like a living camouflage suit. Now for the most curious part: chameleons do have some ability to match their environment, but it's not instant or perfect. They can't turn into a perfect copy of a complex pattern like a flower or a rock. Instead, they shift between a range of colors: greens, browns, yellows, blues, depending on mood, temperature, and light. In cooler conditions, they might darken to absorb more heat. In bright sun, they might lighten to reflect it. And here's what's surprising: some chameleons can even change color in response to social cues from other chameleons, even when they're not in direct contact. And here's what is usually not mentioned: the idea that chameleons change color only for camouflage is mostly a human projection. We love the idea of perfect invisibility, so we assume that's what they're doing. But in nature, communication is often more important than hiding. Bright colors can warn predators, attract mates, or scare off rivals. And here's a twist: in some species, the most colorful chameleons are actually the most visible, not the most hidden. They're not trying to disappear, they're trying to be seen. So the next time you see a chameleon changing color, think less invisibility cloak and more mood ring with a social life. Let's move forward. 7th myth: elephants are afraid of mice. This one is a classic. Cartoons, movies, and jokes all show elephants panicking at the sight of a tiny mouse. But there's no solid evidence that elephants are actually afraid of mice. In fact, elephants in the wild and in captivity usually ignore mice completely. They might be startled by any sudden movement near their feet, but that's not the same as a specific fear of mice. And here's an important detail: elephants have excellent hearing and are very sensitive to vibrations, so a small animal scurrying nearby might make them flinch, just like a person might jump at a sudden noise. Now pay attention. Some experiments have been done to test this myth, and the results are clear. Elephants don't show a consistent fear response to mice. In controlled settings, they might look at a mouse, sniff it, or even ignore it entirely. There's no stampeding, no screaming, no dramatic retreat. And here's what's surprising: elephants are actually more afraid of bees than of any small mammal. They've been observed avoiding areas where beehives are hung, and researchers have used beehive fences to protect crops from elephants. So, if anything, elephants are afraid of bees, not mice. And here's what raises questions: how did this myth become so popular? Probably because it's funny. The image of a giant animal terrified of something tiny is inherently comical. It plays on the idea of unexpected weakness, and that makes it perfect for cartoons and jokes. But in reality, elephants are intelligent. social animals with complex emotions and behaviors. They mourn their dead, protect their young, and remember water sources and migration routes for decades. Reducing them to a silly fear of mice does a disservice to their true nature. The next detail may surprise you. Eighth myth: porcupines can shoot their quills. You've probably heard it, that a porcupine can launch its quills like darts at a predator. But that's not true. Porcupines cannot shoot their quills. The quills are modified hairs with sharp tips and tiny barbs, and they come off easily when touched. When a predator attacks, the porcupine turns its back, raises its quills, and lashes its tail. If the predator makes contact, the quills stick into the skin and can work their way deeper over time, but they are not fired or thrown. Here is an important detail. The quills are loosely attached, so even a light brush can cause them to detach. Once in the skin, the barbs make them hard to remove, and they can migrate deeper into tissue, which is why porcupine quills are so dangerous. But the animal doesn't aim or launch them. And here's what's surprising: porcupines are actually quite slow and not aggressive. They prefer to avoid conflict, climbing trees, or hiding when threatened. The shooting quills idea is a dramatic exaggeration that makes them seem more dangerous than they really are. And here's what is usually not mentioned. This myth might have started because people found quills embedded in animals or objects and assumed they must have been shot. But in reality, the quills only come off on contact. And here's a twist: some animals, like fishes, have learned to attack porcupines in a way that avoids the quills, flipping them over and attacking the soft underbelly. That shows how predators adapt, not by fearing quill guns, but by learning the real behavior of their prey. Let's look at the next point. Ninth myth: daddy longlegs are the most venomous spiders in the world, but their fangs can't penetrate human skin. This one is a classic internet legend. People claim that daddy longlegs have incredibly strong venom, but tiny fangs that can't bite us. But here's the truth: daddy longlegs are not even true spiders. There are two main groups called daddy longlegs: harvestmen, which are arachnids but not spiders, and cellar spiders, which are true spiders. Harvestmen don't have venom glands at all. Cellar spiders do have venom, but it's very weak and not dangerous to humans. Now pay attention. Scientists have tested this myth by letting cellar spiders bite human volunteers. The bites either cause no reaction or only a very mild, short-lived sting, like a mosquito bite. There's no evidence that their venom is especially powerful, and here's what's surprising. The idea that they're the most venomous seems to come from a misunderstanding of a single, old experiment that compared venom strength in a lab setting, not real-world danger. In reality, many common spiders have stronger venom, but we rarely hear about them because they don't bite people often. And here's what raises questions. Why does this myth persist so strongly? Probably because it combines two exciting ideas: extreme danger and a narrow escape. The thought that a tiny creature could be deadly, but we're safe because of a small physical limitation, is both thrilling and comforting. But in truth, daddy longlegs are harmless to humans and actually helpful, eating pests like mites and small insects. So the next time you see one in the corner of a room, there's no need to panic. It's more likely helping you than threatening you. And here's another example. 10th myth: camels store water in their humps. This is one of the most widespread animal myths. People say camels survive in the desert because their humps are full of water, like built-in canteens. But that's not correct. Camels store fat in their humps, not water. That fat can be broken down into energy and water when food and drink are scarce. And here's an important detail. A well-fed camel has a firm, upright hump. When it's been traveling for days without food, the hump becomes soft and droops to one side as the fat is used up. Now for the most curious part. Camels are incredibly efficient at conserving water, but they do it in other ways. They can go for days without drinking, and when they do drink, they can take in huge amounts very quickly. Up to 30 gallons in just minutes. Their bodies are built to handle extreme dehydration. Their red blood cells are oval, not round, so they can keep flowing even when thickened by lack of water. Their kidneys are extremely efficient, producing very concentrated urine, and their feces are so dry they can be used as fuel. But the hump itself, it's just a fat reserve, like a backpack full of energy, not a water tank. And here's what's surprising. If a camel's hump were full of water, it would be a terrible design. Water is heavy, and carrying that much liquid on its back would make the animal unstable, especially in sand. Fat is much more practical. It's compact, energy-dense, and can be metabolized slowly. When the camel burns that fat, it actually produces metabolic water as a byproduct, which helps keep it hydrated. So, in a way, the hump does help with water, but indirectly through chemistry, not storage. And here's a twist. In some cultures, people still believe the hump is a water sac, and that's why they sometimes cut into it during droughts, thinking they'll find liquid. That's not only wrong, it can seriously harm the animal. Let's move on. 11th myth. Sloths are lazy. We all know the image, a slow, sleepy creature hanging from a tree, barely moving, looking like it's permanently on vacation. But sloths aren't lazy, they're just built for a very specific lifestyle. Their slow movement is a survival strategy. By moving slowly and quietly, they avoid attracting the attention of predators like eagles and jaguars. Their metabolism is extremely low, so they don't need to eat much, and they don't burn energy quickly. And here's an important detail. In the wild, sloths are actually quite active when they need to be. Feeding, mating, and even swimming across rivers. Now pay attention. Sloths spend most of their lives upside down, and their bodies are adapted to that. Their organs are anchored in place so they don't press on their lungs when hanging. Their muscles are built for slow, sustained effort, not bursts of speed. And here's what's surprising, sloths can swim quite well. When flooded, they drop from trees into water and paddle with strong, deliberate strokes, sometimes covering long distances. They're not clumsy in water, they're actually graceful and efficient. So the idea that they're lazy is really a misunderstanding of their biology and behavior. And here's what raises questions. Why do we label animals as lazy when they're just different? Maybe because we measure everything by human standards. Speed, productivity, constant activity. But in nature, survival isn't about being fast, it's about being smart, efficient, and well adapted. A sloth's slow life is a perfect fit for its environment. And here's a twist. Some researchers think that sloths' slow movements might even help them avoid detection by heat-sensing predators, since they don't generate much body heat, so what looks like laziness might actually be a brilliant survival trick. The next point is no less amazing. 12th myth. Lemmings commit mass suicide by jumping off cliffs. This one became famous through old nature documentaries and cartoons, showing herds of lemmings blindly rushing into the sea. But that's not true at all. Lemmings do migrate in large numbers when their population grows and food becomes scarce. And during migration, some may accidentally fall into water or off cliffs. But there's no instinctive suicidal behavior. They're not trying to die. They're just trying to find new territory. And sometimes the journey is dangerous. Now for the most curious part. The myth was actually created, or at least heavily exaggerated, by a famous 1958 Disney documentary called White Wilderness. In that film, lemmings were shown jumping into the sea in a mass suicide scene. But behind the scenes, the filmmakers had brought lemmings to a location far from their natural habitat, herded them off a cliff, and filmed it to look like a natural event. It was staged, not real, and here's what's surprising, that fake scene became so iconic that it shaped public perception for decades, even though scientists had already known it was wrong. And here's what is usually not mentioned. Lemming populations do go through boom and bust cycles, with numbers rising and falling dramatically over a few years. When numbers are high, they migrate more, and some die in the process. But that's true of many animals, from birds to wildebeest. There's no special suicide instinct. And here's a twist. The myth is so strong that even today some people still believe it, and it's used as a metaphor for blind conformity or self-destruction in human society. But in reality, lemmings are just small rodents doing what animals do, moving, breeding, and surviving in a harsh environment. Let's dig deeper. 13th myth. Moths are attracted to light because they want to fly into it. You've seen it, moths circling a lamp, a porch light, or a candle, sometimes burning themselves in the flame. It looks like they're obsessed with light, drawn to it like a magnet. But that's not quite right. Moths don't actually want to fly into light. What's happening is that they're using natural light sources, the moon and stars, to navigate. They keep a constant angle to these distant lights to fly in a straight line. But artificial lights are close and bright, so when a moth tries to maintain that angle, it ends up spiraling toward the light instead. Now pay attention. This is called transverse orientation. In the wild, it works perfectly with the moon, which is so far away that the angle doesn't change much as the moth flies. But with a street lamp or a window, the light is nearby, so the angle changes rapidly and the moth can't correct its path. It keeps turning, flying in tighter and tighter circles until it hits the light source. And here's what's surprising. Many nocturnal insects, not just moths, are affected by artificial light in this way. It's not that they love light, it's that their navigation system gets confused by it. And here's what raises questions. Why hasn't evolution fixed this? Probably because artificial light is a very recent thing in evolutionary terms. For millions of years, moths only had the moon and stars, so their system worked fine. Only in the last 100 years or so have bright, close lights become common, and evolution hasn't had time to adapt. And here's a twist. This confusion doesn't just affect navigation. It can also disrupt mating, feeding, and predator avoidance. So what looks like a simple attraction is actually a serious problem for many night-flying insects. If you enjoy our videos about amazing facts, myths, and bold debunking of lies, support us with a like and write the number 1 in the comments. If not, write 0. This way we'll understand what interests you and make our episodes even better. 14th myth. All snakes are slimy. Many people say they hate snakes because they're slimy, gross, or slippery. But snakes are not slimy at all. Their skin is actually dry and covered in scales, just like a lizard's. The smooth, shiny look can make them seem wet, but that's just light reflecting off the scales. And here's an important detail. Snakes shed their skin regularly, and during that time, their eyes can look cloudy and their skin might seem dull, but it's still dry. They don't produce mucus like a slug or a frog. Now for the most curious part, the idea that snakes are slimy might come from how they move. They glide smoothly over surfaces, and that can feel slippery to the touch. But that's not because they're wet, it's because their scales reduce friction and their muscles move in waves. And here's what's surprising. Many people who work with snakes, like herpetologists or snake handlers, say the animals feel more like a warm, dry ribbon than anything slimy. In fact, some snakes have very rough, keeled scales that feel almost like sandpaper. And here's what is usually not mentioned. This myth might also be tied to cultural fears and old stories. In many myths and religions, snakes are symbols of danger, temptation, or evil, and describing them as slimy adds to that negative image. But in reality, snakes are clean animals. They don't carry disease just by being snakes, and most are harmless to humans. And here's a twist. Some of the most slimy animals in nature aren't snakes at all. They're amphibians like frogs and salamanders, which really do have moist, mucus-covered skin. So if you're afraid of slimy creatures, you might be blaming the wrong animal. Let's move forward. 15th myth. Penguins are only found in Antarctica. This is a very common image. Penguins waddling across ice surrounded by snow and glaciers. But penguins live in many places, not just the South Pole. Some species live on sub-Antarctic islands, others in temperate regions like the coasts of South America, South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand. The Galapagos penguin even lives near the equator on the Galapagos Islands, where it has to deal with warm weather and shade itself from the sun. Now pay attention. Different penguin species are adapted to very different climates. Emperor and Adelie penguins are built for extreme cold, with thick layers of fat and dense feathers. But others, like the little blue penguin of Australia and New Zealand, live in milder conditions and don't need the same heavy insulation. And here's what's surprising. Penguins are excellent swimmers and spend most of their time in the water, hunting fish and squid. On land, they might look clumsy, but in the ocean they're fast, agile, and powerful. And here's what raises questions. Why do we associate penguins so strongly with Antarctica? Probably because that's where the most dramatic footage is taken. Huge colonies on ice, dramatic storms, and the famous emperor penguin breeding cycle. Those images dominate documentaries and cartoons, so we forget that penguins are a diverse group with many lifestyles. And here's a twist. In some places, penguins are actually threatened by climate change. Not because it's getting colder, but because it's getting warmer, affecting their food supply and nesting sites. The next detail may surprise you. 16th myth: wolves howl at the moon. You've seen it in movies, books, and even on t-shirts. A lone wolf standing on a hill, head back, howling at a full moon. But wolves don't howl at the moon. They howl to communicate with each other, to locate pack members, defend territory, or coordinate hunting. The moon has nothing to do with it. Wolves howl at all times of night, regardless of the moon's phase, and they often howl when the moon isn't even visible. Now for the most curious part. The myth probably comes from the fact that wolves are more active at night, and a full moon makes it easier for people to see and hear them. So when someone hears a wolf howl on a bright night, it's easy to connect the sound with the moon. But in reality, wolves howl for social reasons, not because of the moon's light or position. And here's what's surprising: howling is just one part of their communication. They also use body language, scent marking, and other vocalizations like barks, whines, and growls. And here's what is usually not mentioned. In some cultures, the image of the wolf howling at the moon has deep symbolic meaning: loneliness, wildness, freedom, or even madness. That symbolism has helped keep the myth alive, even though it's not based on animal behavior. And here's a twist. In places where wolves are returning after being hunted to near extinction, people sometimes report hearing more howling, especially on clear nights. But that's not because of the moon. It's because the packs are growing and communicating more. Let's look at the next point. 17th myth: vultures circle dying animals because they can smell death from miles away. This is a classic image in westerns and adventure stories. Vultures circling overhead, waiting for something to die. But vultures don't actually circle dying animals. They circle because they're using thermal updrafts to stay aloft while searching for food. When one vulture spots a carcass, it lands, and others notice the landing bird and come down to investigate. They're not predicting death. They're reacting to a dead body that's already on the ground. Now pay attention. New World vultures, like turkey vultures, do have an excellent sense of smell and can detect the gases of decay from a distance. But Old World vultures, like those in Africa and Asia, rely more on sight and follow other scavengers to find food. And here's what's surprising: vultures are actually very important for ecosystems. They clean up carcasses quickly, which helps prevent the spread of disease. Without them, rotting animals would stay in the environment much longer, posing a health risk to other animals and people. And here's what raises questions. Why do we see vultures as symbols of death and bad luck? Probably because they're associated with decay and are often seen in harsh, dramatic landscapes. But in many cultures, they're respected as cleaners and protectors. And here's a twist. In some parts of the world, vulture populations have crashed because of poisoned carcasses or veterinary drugs in livestock, and that's caused serious ecological problems like more feral dogs and increased disease. So the death bird is actually a vital part of a healthy environment. And here's another example. 18th myth: cats always land on their feet. This one is almost a law of physics in popular culture. Drop a cat and it will twist in mid-air and land on its paws. And it's true that cats have a remarkable ability called the righting reflex, which lets them orient themselves in the air. But that doesn't mean they always land safely. From low heights, they might not have time to twist. From very high heights, they can still suffer serious injuries or even die. And here's an important detail. Cats can and do get hurt from falls, especially from windows in tall buildings. Now for the most curious part. The righting reflex starts to develop when kittens are a few weeks old and is fully developed by the time they're 6 to 7 weeks. They use their flexible spine, loose shoulder joints, and inner ear balance system to rotate their body in mid-air. But it's not magic, it's physics and biology working together. And here's what's surprising. In some high-rise falls, cats have a better chance of survival than from medium heights because they reach terminal velocity and relax, spreading their body like a parachute. But that's not a reason to test it. Many cats still break bones or suffer internal injuries. And here's what is usually not mentioned. This myth can be dangerous. People sometimes think it's okay to let cats roam near open windows or balconies because they'll land on their feet. But falls from even a few stories can be deadly. And here's a twist. Some cats, especially older or less agile ones, don't have a strong righting reflex and are more likely to land badly. So while cats are impressive acrobats, they're not invincible, and they need protection from dangerous heights. Let's move forward. 19th myth: all spiders are dangerous to humans. Many people panic at the sight of any spider, assuming it's venomous and deadly, but the vast majority of spider species are harmless to people. Their venom is designed for small insects, not large mammals. Even the so-called dangerous spiders like black widows or brown recluses rarely cause serious harm when they do bite, and deaths are extremely rare. And here's an important detail: most spiders avoid humans and will only bite if they feel trapped or threatened, like when pressed against skin. Now pay attention, spiders are actually beneficial. They control insect populations, including pests like flies, mosquitoes, and crop-damaging bugs. In many ecosystems, they're a key part of the food chain. And here's what's surprising: some spiders are even used in biological pest control in agriculture. They're not monsters. They're tiny hunters doing their job. And here's a twist: in some cultures, spiders are seen as symbols of creativity, patience, and protection, not fear. And here's what raises questions. Why are spiders so feared? Probably because of their appearance, multiple legs, quick movements, and the idea of venom. But in reality, you're far more likely to be harmed by common household risks than by a spider. And here's a detail that's often missed. Many spider bites reported by people turn out to be something else: insect stings, skin infections, or allergic reactions. Doctors often misdiagnose these as spider bites, which makes the danger seem bigger than it is. The next point is no less amazing. 20th myth: dolphins are always happy, smiling creatures. We see them in shows, on posters, and in movies, always seeming cheerful, friendly, and intelligent. But that smile is just the shape of their jaws. Dolphins aren't actually smiling. They can feel stress, fear, and pain just like other animals. In the wild, they face threats from pollution, fishing nets, and habitat loss. In captivity, many show signs of stress like repetitive behaviors, aggression, and shortened lifespans. Now for the most curious part: dolphins are indeed intelligent and social, with complex communication and social structures. But that doesn't mean they're always happy or that they enjoy performing for humans. And here's what's surprising: in some places, wild dolphins have learned to avoid boats and people, especially where they've been harassed or fed improperly. Their friendliness in tourist areas is often driven by food, not natural affection. And here's what is usually not mentioned: the image of the happy dolphin is heavily shaped by media and entertainment. We project human emotions onto them, assuming they're joyful because they jump and play. But play behavior in animals is often about practice, social bonding, or energy release, not constant happiness. And here's a twist: some researchers argue that keeping highly intelligent, wide-ranging animals like dolphins in small tanks is ethically questionable, no matter how friendly they seem. Let's dig deeper. 21st myth: all insects are pests. We spray them, squash them, and think of them as dirty, annoying, or dangerous. But most insects are not pests at all. In fact, they're essential to life on Earth. Bees, butterflies, and many other insects pollinate plants, including crops that feed billions of people. Ants and beetles recycle dead matter, enriching the soil. And here's an important detail: without insects, let's dig deeper. 21st myth: all insects are pests. We spray them, squash them, and think of them as dirty, annoying, or dangerous. But most insects are not pests at all. In fact, they're essential to life on Earth. Bees, butterflies, and many other insects pollinate plants, including crops that feed billions of people. Ants and beetles recycle dead matter, enriching the soil. And here's an important detail: without insects, entire ecosystems would collapse. Many birds, reptiles, and mammals depend on them for food, and plants would struggle to reproduce. Now for the most curious part: only a tiny fraction of insect species are actually harmful to humans. A few mosquitoes spread disease, some locusts destroy crops, and a handful of wasps or ants can be aggressive. But the vast majority are harmless or even helpful. And here's what's surprising: in many traditional cultures, insects are a normal part of the diet, rich in protein and nutrients. In some places, people farm crickets, grasshoppers, and mealworms as sustainable food sources. What we see as gross in one culture is seen as nutritious in another. And here's what raises questions. Why do we have such a strong negative reaction to most insects? Part of it is fear of the unknown, small, fast-moving creatures that look very different from us. Part of it is also marketing. Pest control companies have a strong interest in making us see every bug as a threat. And here's a twist. Our war on insects, especially with broad-spectrum pesticides, is causing a global decline in insect populations. Scientists warn that we're losing pollinators and other vital species, which could have serious consequences for food security and biodiversity. Let's move on. 20-second myth. Elephants never forget. This phrase is everywhere, in books, movies, and everyday speech. People say elephants have perfect memories, remembering every place, every face, every event. But while elephants do have excellent long-term memory, they don't literally never forget. Their memory is selective and practical, focused on survival, water sources, migration routes, family members, and dangerous situations. An elephant might remember a specific waterhole from years ago, or recognize a human it hasn't seen in decades, but it doesn't remember every single detail of its life. Now pay attention. Elephant memory is tied to their social structure. They live in complex family groups led by older females who remember where to find food and water during droughts. Young elephants learn from them, and this knowledge is passed down through generations. And here's what's surprising. Elephants can also remember traumatic events, like poaching or conflict with humans, and show signs of stress or avoidance years later. Their memory is powerful, but it's not supernatural. It's a survival tool shaped by evolution. And here's what is usually not mentioned. The idea that elephants never forget probably comes from their ability to recognize individuals after long separations, which is impressive, but not the same as perfect recall. And here's a twist. In some conservation projects, researchers use this memory to their advantage, avoiding areas where elephants have had bad experiences with humans or using familiar sounds and scents to calm them. So the myth, while exaggerated, points to a real and important truth. Elephants are deeply social, intelligent animals with long-lasting memories. The next detail may surprise you. 23rd myth, all bats are blood drinkers. When people think of bats, many imagine vampire bats sinking their teeth into necks and sucking blood. But out of more than 1,300 bat species, only 3 are vampire bats, and they live only in parts of Central and South America. The vast majority of bats eat insects, fruit, nectar, or even small vertebrates like frogs and fish. And here's an important detail. Many bats are crucial pollinators and seed dispersers, helping forests and crops grow. Now for the most curious part, fruit bats, for example, are major pollinators of plants like bananas, mangoes, and agave, used to make tequila. Nectar-feeding bats pollinate flowers at night, while fruit bats spread seeds through their droppings, often far from the parent tree. And here's what's surprising. In some ecosystems, bats are the only animals that can pollinate certain plants or disperse their seeds. Without them, those plants would disappear, and the whole ecosystem would change.